All right, well, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm Amber. I'll be instructing you in the session today. I'm joined by Daniel, Sarah, and Kevin. We're all very excited to be assisting you in answering any questions that come up along the way. So welcome to Trey Labs. Trey Labs is a session that we host bi-weekly on Fridays at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. These sessions are covering different concepts, use cases, and diving into particular connectors to give you more information and the skills that you need to build the automations that are important for your teams. Anybody can join Trey Labs, but to actually participate, you'll need to have access to the platform. After the session, all the resources that we use and the video that is recorded will be available on our website. Trey Academy is a huge part of our learning platform here at Trey. So if you haven't had a chance to check out our Academy, I do recommend it. It's going to give you the foundation and the fundamental knowledge that you'll need to really grasp everything that is talked about in this session. But if you haven't used Trey yet, or you haven't gone through Trey Academy, don't worry, we are going to talk about how to navigate and the terminology, everything around the platform as we go. Does anybody have any questions so far? Cool. So every session is broken down in the same kind of structure. So we're going to take a workflow and we're going to break it down into sections. We're going to build together, test together, and at the end we'll leave time for questions. And if you get stuck along the way, feel free to raise your hand or send a message in the chat, use the QA, and somebody will assist you. So the use case that we're going to be covering today is creating a Slack modal for a software requisition. Some of the key concepts and technology that we'll be looking at are using webhook, utilizing Slack, and we're going to be using our HTTP client connector, which is the universal connector. So what is a Slack modal? According to Slack's website, Slack modals are focused surfaces to collect data from users or display dynamic interactive information. To users, modals appear as a focused surface inside of Slack, enabling brief yet deep interaction with apps. Modals can be assembled using visual and interactive components found in the block kit. So to put this simply, this is going to be a prompt that shows up in your Slack window asking you for information or providing information to you and your users that are using the app that you create. So we're going to break down today's session like this. We're going to create our workflow first, and then we're going to go and create a Slack app. After we create our Slack app, we'll authenticate in Trey. Then we'll work on displaying the modal in Slack. And then we will display a responding modal to whatever we've collected information. So we want to have a information returned to the user once they've submitted information to us through the first modal. And then we're going to collect that modal data and store it. So step one, we're going to create a workflow. So everybody go ahead and navigate to your Trey platform. And what we'll be doing for this first section is we'll be selecting a webhook trigger, enabling our workflow, and then we're going to get the public URL, which we'll need for creating our Slack app. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my account. And here you can see I'm on my dashboard. I want to create a new workflow. So I'll navigate to the top right corner, click new workflow. Here you want to give a meaningful name. So the nomenclature I use is anytime I'm working with Trey Labs, I will put Trey Labs. And then I'm going to be saying what this is doing. some brief understanding. So whoever's maybe looking in my account, they can, or I'm collaborating with someone, they'll understand what this workflow is doing. So this is going to be a Slack modal. And this example will be for a software requisition. So this is going to allow our team to request for new software to be used within our company. And here you can put who has access to your workflow. If you keep it personal, only you will be able to work on this workflow, but you can switch it to organization and allow everybody to interact with this. You can always switch it from personal to organization and later on, but if you are not the owner of the organization, you won't be able to change it back to personal once you've moved it over. So once you've typed in your workflow name, go ahead and click Next Step. This is going to prompt your trigger selection window to open. There's a variety of different triggers that you can use here at Trey to execute your workflow. We mostly work with the manual trigger during these enablement sessions because that gives us the ability to just run our workflow immediately by clicking a button. These are also good for data migrations or workflows that you only need to run one time. Some of the other ones that we've interacted with are callable triggers, form triggers, schedule triggers, and today we're going to be utilizing a webhook. Webhooks allow you to get information from application webhooks, send data to Trey. So Trey isn't acting as the webhook, but the destination for the webhook event data to come to. All of these other services that you see here, these are all webhooks that have already been pre-configured to these specific services. So go ahead and select webhook and then click Create Workflow. This is going to open up your workflow builder. In the center, you have your workflow canvas. To the right is the properties panel, and to the left is the connectors panel. Right now, there's nothing selected for connector, so there's no information to be displayed for your connectors panel. But if I click onto the trigger, you'll see that this has been dynamically set to all the properties surrounding this trigger. If you scroll to the bottom, you'll be able to see the expected output for the webhook. This can be changed according to the data that is received once it's been run, but this is just a guess on what we're expecting. The operation that is set is webhook is received. You can also reply to a webhook, but in this case, we just want to leave it as is. We do want to update the name of our trigger to something more meaningful so that anybody that is collaborating with us will have a brief understanding of what's going on here. So this is going to be when a Slack event happens. So I'm going to say Slack event received. So a Slack event has been received by the workflow, and then we're going to continue on with some other steps later on. The next thing that we want to do is we want to enable our workflow because we won't be able to get any data from the Slack events if this is not open up and allowed to receive information. So I'll go ahead and click enable. We can see this is now saved and enabled. You can always see changes that have gone on within your workflow by looking at the history. Think of this as a version control. Especially if you're collaborating, you'll be able to see who's made changes, what the changes are, and being able to roll back to those versions. You'll have a list of different dates from all the changes that have happened. You can also search for different changes that have occurred. You also have the ability to undo. So if I've made a change and I was like, oh man, what happened there? I can always undo what I just did. Here in the top left corner, there's a 3-dot indicator that you can click on to get to the export and import of workflows. So this is going to allow you to extract all the information about your workflow, the workflow itself in JSON format. So you can maybe upload it to a different organization or keep different versions of your workflow saved somewhere. We're going to go ahead and click on the workflow settings. This prompt will show us the information that we're looking for, which is the public URL. We're going to need this, so we're going to leave this window open. But now we're going to move on to the next section. Does anybody have any questions so far? Awesome. So our next step in this use case is to create a Slack app. Typically when we work with Slack within Tray, we use the Slack connector. The Slack connector is a Tray application that gets installed into your workspace. But we're not going to be using the Slack application right now. We're going to be Tray Slack application. We're going to be creating our very own. So to do so, we need to navigate to this link that I'll send you in the chat. Copy the link. So I put the link in the chat. When I go to this link, this is going to show the page that allows me to create a new application. So you're going to give your name and application. This name is up to you what you want to call your app, but you can always update it later. Here, what I'm going to name it is, this is my Slack Modal, and this is for software. Right? And then we want to select what workspace. So I'm part of a few different workspaces. I want to select the proper workspace to be installing this, creating this in. So you'll want to select the workspace that you just created. For me, I'm going to be working out of Tray Labs, but for you, whatever one that you created at the beginning of the session, you're going to want to select. Once you create or select your workspace, go ahead and create the app. This is going to bring you to the basic information around your application that you're building. So Slack apps allow you to extend the functionality of what's already there available, and we can then use that to automate different processes. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to select the / command. The / command is going to be the actual event that's going to prompt the user to give me the information I need. So in Slack, there's different commands that you can use to have things happen, and one of those being a / command. So we're going to select / command. Here on the / command window, we're going to create a new command. You'll type in / and whatever you want to call your / command. For this one, let's call it software -request. Make it simple for people. Next is going to ask for the request URL. This is going to be where you're going to input your workflow's URL, allowing that information to be passed from the Slack channel or Slack community into your workflow. So back here, I just copied my URL by clicking copying to clipboard, and I'm going to paste this here. So what happens here in Slack is they're creating a webhook. They're going to create an event listener, and when that event happens, that data is going to flow to Tray, almost like Tray is a API endpoint. So we're utilizing Tray as an API endpoint to send the data, and then Tray will carry out some tasks that we ask. You can put in a description. So this is going to be software requisition modal. And you can add like a hint here. So after your software request command, you can have like some additional like information that shows to the user. So sometimes you want the user to actually pass in some additional information after your command. So say like, you know, if it's software request, you also want to know what team they're on. You could have the user do space and then the team they're on, but in this case, we don't need that. You could put no additional information needed. And what that will look like is down here. You can see it gives you an example of what that's going to output, but we're just going to leave that blank. So we have all the information that's needed for our slash command, so go ahead and click save. We have our slash command created. Awesome. We do need to add the ability to interact with our users. So we are going to go back to basic information, and under the add features and functionality, we're going to click on interactive components. From here, all we need to do is enable the interactivity. Once we enable it, we also need to provide the workflow URL, just like we did for the slash command. So this is going to be another event, another webhook that Slack is creating to send information to where the endpoint that we have, which is our tray workflow. Go ahead and click save. We have all of the functionality that we need for our app. We now need to install it into our workspace. So what I'm going to do is click on install app, click install app to workspace, and it should show you the workspace that you're working out of. For me, it's going to be the Tray Lab Slack community, so I'm going to click allow. This is going to now show me the token I'll need to authenticate my app in Tray. Typically, you don't want to share this information because you don't want this information to be used in some kind of way that it shouldn't be. I'm showing here for example, but I will be deleting this later on. So you can reinstall your app. We're going to need this value in just a moment. Was anybody able to or I want to make sure everybody's able to get their app installed, or did anybody have any questions so far?
I think I'm good.
Awesome. So the next step for us is to authenticate. So we're going to need to authenticate our application into Tray to say that we have permission to be receiving and sending information back to Slack. The steps that we'll be carrying out here in this section are to create a token-based service, add a description, add a single property to the service, then creating our authentication with that service, and then adding our Slack token. So we're going to go back to our our Tray application. I can close out that prompt. In the top right corner, there's an X that I'll click on to go back to my dashboard. From here, I'm going to navigate to services. I want to make sure I'm in my personal workspace because that's only where services is available. So on the left navigation, I'm going to find services. Here, I'm going to click add new service. This is going to allow me to add a template for creating authentications. So we're going to be utilizing our HTTP connector in this workflow. And in order to authenticate, we need to have a service created. So I don't want to just hard code all my values into my HTTP connector where they're visibly available. I want them to be masked. And in order to create a masked authentication, I need to create a service template. So I'm going to call this Slack Modal for my service name. You can add a logo. So if you want to go and find Slack's logo, you can put this here, but it's not necessary. One thing that is required is that we put a description for this service. So what is this for? This is for, mine is for Tray Labs, Slack Modal app. So this is my short description. Next, I'm going to select the authentication type. We're going to be using a token-based authentication. I'm now going to add a property. My property is where I'm going to have a input for the token that was created or generated by Slack when we created our app. So the title is going to be what you're going to be using for your authentication token. So this is an access token. And you can see Tray will generate a usable name out of the title you create. We don't need to put any other information here because that will be filled in when we create our authentication. You could put a default value there, but we don't need a default. There's always going to be a different authentication depending who's using our application. So this is going to allow anybody on your team to authenticate with this template for your Slack application if you want them to authenticate or if they have their own Slack application. So we're going to click Add Service in the top right corner. We can see that the service has been created. If we go back to services, I can see that my Slack Modal service is now created. I need to now go add my authentication for this service. So I'll click on authentication. I'm now going to create a new authentication. Much like when you create a workflow, you're going to get a prompt to add a name. You want to give it something meaningful. The nomenclature I use is in square brackets. I put the environment. So is this a test environment? Is this a dev environment? Or is this a production environment? For me, this is kind of a production environment because it's in the Trade Labs community where we all interact with each other. So I'm going to put production, but maybe for you, you just use the one that you just created for yourself. So that would probably be a dev environment. Next, I'm going to put what the service is. This is Trade Labs Slack, but it's my account, right? It's my application that I created. So I'm going to put Amber's account. And finally, I'm going to put a date timestamp because I find it easy for me to quickly look through the list of authentications I have and know what is the most up to date. So I'm going to go ahead and put the date. 4th.
Amber, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, no problem.
When I was still in the previous page, creating the details of this new
the service,
was I supposed to click save change, or how did I get from there to where you are now?
Yeah, so let me copy this and cancel. So from here, whenever you create your service, you put your service name, you need to put your description, get your token, add one property. The property should have been just access token.
Perfect.
Click add service in the top corner, which should be blue if you filled out everything correctly.
I did that.
And then, you'll navigate back to services to make sure you see your service there. And then you're going to go to authentication. So
okay, thank you.
So you're going to click create new authentication. Same location that you'll see your create new workflow. The same kind of prompt that will come up. So here we want to give a meaningful name. The one that I was using is the nomenclature that helps me figure out what authentication when I look at a list of authentications. So here is going to be what environment you're working in, what service you're using, whose account this belongs to, and then the date. Next, what I'm going to do is select who has access to this authentication. Here, it could either be personal or organization. If your workflow is personal, you can use organization level authentication, but it can't be the opposite. So if you created an organization workflow, your authentication has to be organization. It can't be personal. So I created a personal. I could make this organization, but for now I'm going to keep it personal. And then I need to select my service. So I'm going to go and find my service that I created. I can either scroll through here and find it, or I can search. I called mine Slack Modal, so that's what I'm going to select here. Then I'm going to click next. And you can see here's my access token and my input that I created in my service. This is where I'm going to put my token that was generated by Slack. So I'm going to come back here, copy that value, go back to tray, paste, and create authentication. My authentication was successful, as you can see in the bottom left corner here, and I can see when it was created. So I'm going to go back to my workflow tab, and I can go back to start to create my workflow steps that I need. Was everybody able to create their authentication?
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Awesome. So now what we're going to be doing is actually displaying our modal. The things that we need to do is create or add our HTTP connector, and then we're going to be configuring it. So let's go back to our workflow that we just created. And from here, before we actually display our modal, we want to make sure that the data or the authentication is working properly, right? So there's no use in us trying to create a modal if we didn't actually authenticate properly. So what I'm going to do is go to my Slack community. I can go to any channel, and I'm going to put in my / command to see if it's working as expected. So from here, I can type in software requests, press enter. Nothing should happen because we haven't wrote that functionality yet. But if I go back to Tray, I should see an event in my debug logs. So I'm currently in my view, my build mode. I can toggle to debug to see testing or see data that has come into my workflow. On the left side, you can see my connector panel has now turned into my logs. And here I can see the execution log. So it's green, showing me everything, indicating everything was successful. I have a date timestamp and when, if it was successful or not. I'll go ahead and click into that execution. I can see the step that executed. I can click there to see some more granular information. I'll be able to see my inputs and my outputs. Viewing this information and knowing your inputs and outputs is very important to know what you're going to be building in your workflow. So testing as you go. There is no inputs here because we haven't configured anything for our trigger, but there's going to be the outputs from the event from Slack. So here I can see there's some body information. I can see where the team it came from. This came from a direct message because I put it to myself. I can see the user that sent in this event and also their username. And I can also see the / command that came in. So if I had multiple / commands within my application, I can use this command line to maybe do some branching to use the same workflow to handle these different commands all in one. So I successfully was able to use the / command. Awesome. Now what I want to do is add my HTTP connector. And my HTTP connector is what I'm going to be using to interact with Slack. I'm going to be creating a Slack modal to send information to. So how I need to configure this is how Slack is expecting information. In order for me to know what that is I went to Slack's documentation, look through and to see what needs to be configured within my HTTP connector. So I'm going to send a link in chat to Slack's documentation for creating a modal. And if you navigate to that link, we can scroll down to see what we actually need to open our modal. So I'm going to click on Open Modal. And you can see there's all this information about what actually needs to happen for us to send this information. And down here, we have an example of what needs to be sent in. So it looks like we're going to be using a post method. Here's the URL we're going to be sending to. We also need to send in some content type, and we have to send in our access token. This is the example of what the payload should look like, but we will configure our own to what we need. So let's start off by looking at the first thing, which is the operation. So if you click on your HTTP connector, the operation is post, and then we have our URL. So there's different operations that you can interact with HTTP, which is allowing you to make requests across the web. Post is to send data, get is to receive data, put is to update data, and delete to delete data. There are some other operations, but those are the most common ones that you'll see. The URL is going to be the endpoint that you're going to be sending data to. So before we were the endpoint, we provided Tray workflow URL for data to be sent to, and now we're going to be actually sending data back. So there was a link here under the example. Go ahead and copy that link. and paste that in your URL. We also need to add some headers. Headers allow additional information to be sent along to the service that we're going to be interacting with. The headers that they have here are the content type, which has a value of application JSON. So I'm going to grab content type, come back to my workflow, add a header. My key is going to be content type, and my value is going to be application JSON. I'm going to paste that there. There is an additional little bit of information that we need to send in that isn't immediately obvious in the documentation, but from some testing on my own, I was able to see that. We also need to pass in the character set. So I'm going to put a semicolon, a space, type in character set, char set, and then if I come to the documentation where it says view modal, I can look through here about what the character set needs to be. So if I type in char set, it looks like they're expecting it to be for post UTF-8. So I'm going to grab that value, come in here, put an equals, and I'm going to put my character set. So all of our headers are configured. We're going to scroll down in our properties panel to see our body. Our body can be set to different kind of data that we're going to be sending. We're going to be sending raw JSON. I know this because looking at here, this is just a giant object. It's a key value pairs. Everything is wrapped in quotes, indicating that this is JSON. So I'm going to be sending raw JSON. I can either use an object and replicate all of these different keys, which could be pretty tedious, or I can use it as a string and just put the entire paste-through value inside of here, which is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to copy this payload, come back to my workflow, click edit, paste the value in, and then I just need to do a little bit of configuration to make this usable within my own workflow. So first I'm going to do is save it, and then I'm going to reopen it because I want to make sure everything's there. Reopen it to make the edits I need. First, the trigger ID. Looks like this is hard-coded to an example. I want to put the trigger ID that is actually coming from my trigger, my event, which is available in that trigger execution that we just saw. So what I can do is come here and I can see, well, I don't see that trigger ID available. So what I can do is go to my debug logs, go to the latest execution, click use output, and that's going to refresh all the information that I have access to. Pretty cool. So now I can see that I have.
Where was the use output button?
Yeah. So if you click on your execution, click on the trigger output, you can see here's the output, and then there's the use output.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, another little tip, if you're not clicked into the trigger and you want to see that dynamically reset, you can do shift click on that step, and it's going to populate the properties panel for that step.
Thank you.
Now I can see my output's been refreshed. Under the body, I can see that I have the trigger ID, and that's exactly what we're looking for our payload. So I'm going to right click on that. So it's under the output of the properties panel, under body, right click, get JSON path, copy the JSON path, and then I'm going to press OK, come back to my HTTP connector, scroll down to my body, click edit, and I'm going to replace this value. I want the quotes there because it needs to be a string. And if we look at the output here, it looks like our ID, so I want to look for my trigger ID inside of here. It is a string, so it should be fine, but we'll keep it inside the quotes just to be sure. So I'm going to delete that value. I can directly paste this inside of here, but that's going to show it as is. I wanted to dynamically set the value inside of these quotes. So what I'm going to do is add a curly bracket on both sides. This is called templating, and it allows me to inject dynamic values into a string or into text. So now I'll have my actual trigger for every single event that comes in set. Now what I want to do is actually put my identifier. Well, what's my identifier for this? This is going to be for my software requisition. So I'm going to call this my ID, software requisition. That's what the slash command is for, or for the modal. And I can even put modal there to give a little more information. So what's going to show up is a modal, right? It's going to have a prompt. It's going to look similar to this. So there's going to be a title and then some inputs and then a button, if we'd like, for the user to put some information in. So you can see here, it shows me a title, little group of information. It's going to be plain text. And then here it just says just modal. I'm going to update this to software position. So that's what's going to show up as the information for my user. Inside of here are all the blocks. If you recall, when we were looking at what a modal is, it's a interactive layer or view that is made up of different blocks. So how Slack creates like different information or how they display things or different little blocks that you can create messages, create views, and use all these different components to make it up. So here they have some predefined, but we don't really want to use theirs. We want to use the ones that we need. So back in the documentation, if you scroll down to section 2, composing views of modals, you can click on the view example, which is going to bring you to their block builder kit, right? So this is going to show you all the different kind of components that you can use. There's sections with plain text, actions, driver, images, contexts, inputs, all this different information. And then you can see what it would look like in your modal. So you can see what it would look like in message, attachments. We're using a modal, so that's what I wanted to simulate. And you can see they have all these different things in here that you can remove and add to. So I don't need the title. I don't need channel. I do want to have an input. I think I want to have a couple inputs.
Remember,
So
how did you get there?
yeah, so from the documentation site that I send you a link to, if you scroll down or at the very top, you can click on section 2, composing view of modal. And they have this view example. That's going to bring you to their block kit builder.
Thank you.
Yeah, make sure that you're on the modal view because it's going to show you what your modal is going to look like. And then here you can click on different components for different blocks to what you want your modal. So basically I'm going to configure my modal here and then copy and paste my blocks into my payload. So I know exactly what it's going to look like instead of having to guess, if that makes sense. So I want to have a few inputs, one for like the software name, one for the link to the software, one for maybe the cost. And then I want to have a long description for them to put the reason why they need it. So I have input 1, input 2. I'm going to add another input. So it's going to add one. So I have my name, my link, my cost. And then I want to have a multi-line plain text input. So that's going to be where my comment's going to go. So this is what my modal I'm expecting to look like. So I can come over here to the left side and it's going to show me the JSON representation of what this is. Really nice. So we don't have to actually configure all this information. It's done for us. So we can see that we don't need this. We already got it from the example that they gave. All I need are the blocks. The blocks are these things right here. Each of these little components. Input, 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 and input. We can also change like the option, the placeholder here to see what it'll look like before we copy and paste it. So what I'm looking for, okay, here's my block. It's an input. Here's the element itself. it shows me that there is placeholder text and the text shows option 1. Well, I want this to be the software name. So I'm going to put our service's name, service name. And I'll give it a second, and you can see it shows service name, but it's still saying option 1. I don't want it to say option 1. I also want it to reflect service name. Or maybe I'll say, please input your service name. So I'm going to wait for that to show. Looks pretty good to me. Then I'm going to come to my second option and do the same thing. My placeholder text, this should be the link. This will be the service link. And then for the label, where it says option 2, I'm going to say, please provide link. This. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the next one here, which is another input. And I'm going to add the information that I'm wanting, which is going to be the cost, right? So here's my type, my element. I'm going to want it to say what is the cost. Okay. So here it says write something, so I'm going to look for where it says write something. It doesn't look like it has that. So what you can do is you can add that yourself, or should be under element. I think if it doesn't put placeholder, that's the default value. I don't want it to say that, so I'm going to put comma place. Oops, and it needs to be in quotes. Placeholder, and then it's going to be an object. So have a object after it. Don't worry if you see some errors, it's because we're editing. And then it needs to have inside of there type. Type is going to be plain text, plain underscore text. And I'm just following the nomenclature that they're using up here. I'm using this as an example, and then it's going to be comma. After the comma, I don't know where I put that comma down here. Oops. Should be there. It's going to have the actual text value. And then I'm going to put in quotes cost. And now you can see it went from write something to saying cost. And I can even put service cost. That looks much better. So finally, I need to do the same thing for my final block, which is my big text. My big text, I want to put this as like the reason why. So my element has some, it has multi-line. It doesn't look like it has the comment or placeholder. I don't need to add a placeholder. I think write something is fine. So I'm just going to update my label. So my label is going to be, please provide reason for your need. So here, I might add some punctuation since I did for the other ones as well, just to make it look nice. And then here. So I have all of my labels, all my inputs. One thing, if you notice, there's an action ID. I want to give these unique IDs so that I can grab the input value from each. So I'm going to give it the same action ID that it has a name. So this is the service name for the first block. My option 2 action ID is service link. So that's for my next block. And nothing's going to change over here. This is like a meta field, like a additional value on the input so that we can have a unique identifier to it. Then I'm going to come down to my next block, and it doesn't even look like they added the action ID. So if you look at the element, it doesn't have an action ID. So after type, I'm going to add action underscore ID following the same one above. And my action ID is the service cost. So in quotes, I'm going to put service underscore cost in quotes and make sure I put my comma. Then you can see all the red lines disappeared. My service cost is there. I have one more, which is my multi-line element, and it also doesn't have the action ID. So I'm going to put action ID quotes, and this one is service reason and a comma. So everything should be there. There's no red lines. Should everybody be able to update that and see the proper modal that they want to show in Slack?
I did. And then I didn't get the second two fields that were a label, and I was just wondering where you got those from.
Yep. So it was, do you have are all four showing up in your modal?
There were, and then I deleted two.
Okay. So on the left-hand side, you can add more elements. So I added a multi-line element, I added a plain text element, and it looks like you can actually rearrange them too in the order you want.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, and then I just went in and updated them, and some of them don't have everything that you need. So I just kind of looked at like how the other ones are laid out. So for this element, my big text area, I had to add action ID. That was the only thing I needed there. I like where it says write something, so I don't need to add placeholder text. And then my second one for my cost, I had to add action ID and placeholder. And you can literally just copy and paste the one from above and paste it in, but it needs to make sure it's inside an element, and then you change it.
Okay, thank you, Amber.
No problem. So once you have all of your blocks, come to line 18, well, it's 18 for me, and you can see this list. I can know that it's a list because it's denoted by a square bracket. After my list, I'm going to highlight all of my elements down to the closing list on 78. Might be a little more, might be a little less for you for the number, but we want to make sure we grab everything between the square brackets, and I'm going to copy it. Once I copy it, I'm going to come back to my workflow, and I'm going to replace the blocks inside of here. So I'm going to delete it, and you can see reflects what's inside of here, blocks, square brackets, blocks, square brackets, and I'm going to paste my values. So now it's going to have all the modal information that I want. I already know what it looks like because I have this little visualizer here. Paste the value in, and I can save it. I'll give you guys a second to make sure that everybody gets there.
And can you please show again where you saved that to in the...
Yep. So in my HTTP connector, I click into it, scroll down my properties panel to the body. Inside of the raw body, I click edit, where we put the example from their documentation. I scrolled to where it said blocks, and they already had code inside their blocks. So what I did was highlighted all of it and deleted it. So it just has the square brackets. And then I pasted what I built inside of here in that block. So you can see it kind of reflects what we have where it says blocks. Highlight everything between the square brackets because that's your list.
Perfect.
Copy it, and then come back to Trey. Inside of your blocks, you're going to paste it.
Thank you.
No problem. And the reason why we do it in one place and bring it over is just so that it's nice that Slack has this visualizer for you so you can see exactly what you're expecting. It has some error handling in here. This is really nice so that you don't have to try and like write all that out in the little editor here. And you can see exactly what you're going to get. So that's what I like doing it over here and then just bringing it into Trey. So once I have that, I need to rename my steps. So this is going to be display request modal. That's what this step is doing. So my event's going to come in, and then I'm going to respond with my request modal. I almost forgot one very important thing, which is to send along our authentication. We did all that work for authentication. We now need to send in our access token. Remember when we were looking at what is needed to do this, it said that we need to send in the authorization. So inside of Tray, underneath the body, there's this Show Advanced Properties. If you click that, scroll up, keep going all the way up here, we can see authorization. It's going to be under URL. Click on that. You're going to click on the OAuth 2 option, because that's how this is authenticating. It's an OAuth token. Even though we use token-based in our service instead of OAuth, we already have authenticated. If you remember, when we created our app, a little window showed up and it was like, do you give access to this application in that workspace? And we said accept. That was an OAuth process that returned a token. So we've already OAuth in, we have the token, but the token type is OAuth, so I'm gonna click OAuth. Here, we have access token, and I can put my value here. In order to dynamically get that value in, under my authentication, I need to select authentication. I have lots of authentication, so that's why it's really important to name it something meaningful. Mine was, I think it was production, and I can see it now. Trey.
I'm not finding authorization in the panel.
The authentication or authorization?
Okay, so authentication I have, authorization I didn't know how to find.
Okay, so let's first find the authentication, which I'm going to find mine, which is the Tray Lab Slack. Select it. And then at the very bottom of the properties panel, there's a button that says Show Advanced Properties. If you click that and then scroll all the way back up, right underneath the URL, you should see authorization type with a drop down. And I selected OAuth 2.
Thank you.
And you have all these different nested values, and then you have your input where your authentication is going to grab. So we need to grab our key from authentication and put it here. To do so, I'm going to change the data type. We have options to change the data type to JSON path. And if I click in here and put a $, it'll start to autofill and give me my options. So I'm going to click auth, and then I can see, hey, there's my access token. Remember when we put an access token, Tray created a usable name. So now I have my access token. Give you guys a second. So now we need to test this. We have all the steps in place. We have our payload available. We need to go make sure that it's working properly. So one thing to note, when you're first setting up a modal, it might take a couple of times for it to kick into place, I noticed. So we'll try it, make sure it's working. If not, we don't need to change anything. We just need to resubmit our Slack command. Once we do it a couple of times, it doesn't fail anymore.
Amber, one last question.
Go ahead.
What was I didn't follow along at the part where we were entering the key and value way earlier. And I have the key correct. And I copied some of the value, but I didn't finalize it. And I was wondering if I could.
For the body itself?
No, not there. When we went to headers.
Headers here.
Yeah.
Right. So if you add header, you'll have content type, application JSON.
I have all of that. And then what was next?
Here, there's going to be a semicolon, character set or char set is shortening equals UTF-8.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
And this isn't like immediately obvious because here in the documentation where it shows their headers they need, they don't tell you that you need to set the character set. Like maybe it's somewhere else. I wasn't able to find it other than in the errors. And the reason I found that is because I got an error when I was testing. And the error was that I had a missing character set. Okay. And you can see that, oh, you actually, if you're doing a post, your content type needs to pass in the character set.
Thank you.
So, so let's go ahead and test this. Come back to your Slack community or your workspace, put in your / command, press enter, wait a second to see if it came through. Mine didn't, so I'm going to come to my debug logs, look at my execution, come in here. I see that it's a 200. 200 status code typically means it was okay, but it's not always the case. So I need to scroll down to make sure that I have information. Must define submit. input. Oh, looks like I'm missing a submit. So our submit, we have a submit here. So I want to make sure I have a submit. So if you guys can go back to the block builder, we'll see that there's this object that says submit. Go ahead and highlight that and copy it. I forgot about the submit. There's no way to submit our input. So yeah, just highlight and copy submit from your block builder where we created our blocks. Go back to tray, come to your input or your raw body. And then here where it says title, right after title, I'm gonna press enter and paste my submit. So I have title, submit. Remember where we created the callback ID, we updated our title. Under the title, I put submit type, plain text. It has a submit button. You can change it to say send. You can have it say whatever you want. Submit makes sense. I'm gonna leave it as submit. Verify that this looks right. I don't need a close. I think I want it to close on, but maybe if you want to have a cancel button, you could have a cancel button, completely up to you, but this cancels as well. So I don't really think it's necessary. I'm gonna go ahead and save, let that save. All right, and I'm gonna go give it a try again. So software request, press enter. Oh, awesome. My freaking modal showed up. So now I can put in, I can fill this out, right? I can fill out what this is going to look like. So I'm going to put in my software name, Slack. I need to provide a link. I'm going to just grab one of Slack's links that I already have open for testing purposes. Paste this link in. What's the cost? It's free. I like Slack. And then I'm going to submit. So once I submit, my modal automatically closes. But it looks like I got an error here. So we're going to figure out why the error is. I was expecting this error because we haven't finished being able to receive our data, but don't be afraid if you ever get an error. Just like here, you know, things happen. I forgot that we needed a submit button. We just test, we see what's the problem. Most of the time the service is going to give you information around like what happened. So here, even though I got a 200, which typically means it's successful, our run said it was green, knowing your inputs and outputs is important. So here it said it was okay, but I wasn't able to create my modal because there was an error. I need a submit for when I'm using an input. Might be a little intimidating because this is in JSON, but if you just read through the message, they're pretty clear on what it is. So was everybody able to get their modal to show up?
Mine did not show up.
Okay. Did you do your slash command?
Yes.
And did you go to your debug logs to see your latest execution?
I'm in there now.
And then do you have a slash command? So this was my last execution. So here I typed in my slash command and then it shows my HTTP connector with 200. And if I scroll down, it shows me all this information around what was set. What does yours have?
That's, okay, one sec. Mine shows 200. And then what key identifier should I be looking for as to where I did something wrong?
If you have an error, it will have a message inside your body. So like the first time I didn't have my submit, so it showed message.
Okay. It will have a message?
Yeah, what does yours have?
I don't see any message. I do see at the end, it says body, okay, :false, error, invalid post type. So maybe I posted in the body incorrectly.
Okay, so it just says error, doesn't have anything else?
Error, invalid post type.
And there's no response metadata? Post type. Oh, did you, let's see. You have post here, you have your URL.
Let me go down over there.
So that's in your HTTP.
Yes, I have post, I have the URL.
You have your authentication. with
Yes.
the access token.
Yes.
You have header, content type, application JSON.
Let me make sure that's correct because, oh, I see my mistake. I did a colon instead of a semicolon after application JSON. That's a semicolon that you did?
Mm-hmm. It's
Okay.
a little hard to see. I wonder if I can zoom in.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, maybe that's my mistake because I had that as a colon.
It's the little things to get you.
Yeah,
So,
definitely. And then to make sure that my workflow is saved.
yep, you click anywhere into the canvas. So anywhere in here
Mhm.
will verify that it's saved. And you can see in the bottom left corner, it'll say saved and enabled.
Perfect.
And then
Okay, great. I'll try again.
Yeah, and I'll try again as well to show you there. That's what you should get.
Oh, hold on. I see another thing that might have been a problem. Oh, no, still not working for me.
Okay.
So I'll go back into debug.
Yep, go back to your debug, look at your output, look at the error that it might have shown, just like we did. What's the error you're getting now?
Error invalid JSON.
Okay, so that probably means that your JSON that you provided in here is incorrect. What you're gonna wanna do is make sure that you copy all of this from the first link, which is under composing view. And under the blocks, that's what we updated, but go ahead and just start this from just verifying. You don't either, you can either copy and start again, or just verifying that it meets this layout. So it
Do I
needs to look like,
from which like parentheses?
so right here,
And then end
at the very bottom down here.
Okay, great. I might have ended before the square, like after the square parentheses for some reason.
Yeah, so there should be 2 after the square.
Okay. So then I go into here.
Into your body.
Looking at the body.
You can see I have 2 after my square. And my square is a lot longer because I pasted all of the blocks that I created inside of the Slack editor.
Yeah. Okay, blocks. And so from under, I'm looking at the code right now, and so I'm looking at from after blocks, correct?
Yep, so blocks, it should have a curly bracket, your trigger, your view, your type, your submit, your blocks.
Yeah.
Your blocks is all the blocks that you created in the editor in Slack, and it has a closing square bracket and 2 curly brackets.
Okay.
And all of this should have been generated here, and you'll know if there's an error in that JSON because it will highlight, right? So if I delete something, you see how it has like a red squiggly line? You want to make sure that that's all correct.
Okay, I think that probably my problem lies in like a detail either in like somewhere in that code. So
Sure.
I'm happy to play with it, and I can always just let you know if I have a question later, but I think it will work once I fix that.
Okay, definitely. So we'll go ahead and carry on. So for those of you that got it to work properly, what we're going to look at is like the last one that I just sent in. I have my payload that I sent. I didn't respond to it, but the one that I responded to, I can see it failed. And why did it fail? It shows that the trigger ID wasn't identified. So what's different here is if I look at my trigger, now the body looks different from when the body of this event. So events look different according to what event happened. So this event was a slash command, where this event was the event of somebody responding to the modal inputs. So I need to make sure that I am creating my workflow in a way that I'm accommodating 2 different events, either a slash command or the interactivity that I'm having with the user. So to do so, we're going to look at our next steps, which is displaying our responding modal. the steps here is to add an object helper and the Boolean condition. So the first thing that I want to do is inspect my inputs and outputs, because I need to know what my inputs and outputs are expected for this data that's coming in when I respond to a modal. And it looks like I have a payload, but it's all compressed. So when JSON is actually sent across the web, it's minified and it's stringified, as in like it's just a big string, no longer an object that you can interact with. We're going to need to convert this into JSON, and we want to make sure that our body, like one, we can reference this trigger from the body, and two, it's not just in the body, it's in a payload object now, where before this one, if I look at the body, there is no payload object, it's just in the body. So I need to make sure that I'm accounting for that. In order to do that, what I'm going to do is come in here and add a Boolean step directly underneath my trigger. And I'm going to configure this to look if a property exists or not. So if the payload property exists, then it's not the slash command, it's the responding to the inputs. And so I'll come down this way. But if it doesn't have the payload body, then I'm going to be down this branch, which is the slash command. So I'm going to pull my display modal into my false branch, because that is what I'm looking for, right? If the payload doesn't exist, it's a slash command. So here, I'm going to do, in my Boolean condition, I'm going to change it to property exists. My property, I'm going to take up to my trigger. And now I can see, oh, it's not reflecting what I'm expecting. It's reflecting the slash command. So I'll go to my debug logs, find my execution that had the reply to the trigger, and I'm going to use output, go to build. I can then JSON path again to see payload. So your JSON path for your Boolean will be $steps.trigger.body.payload. So that's what we're looking for. Does this property exist? If it does, it's the different type of event. We have two different events. So one event's going to go this way, the other event's going to go this way. This one is going to be your slash command. This one's going to be responding to a modal input. So now this should work properly. I need to rename this. So I'm going to say is modal response event question, right? Because I'm asking a question. Is this true or is this false? So if it's us responding to the modal, we now need to take that output that is a giant string and convert it into an object. So I'm going to come in here, grab my object helper. So this is my connectors panel. I can search for it by just scrolling through and looking for my object helper, or I'm going to search for my object helper. I want to convert a string into an object, so I'm going to be utilizing my helper for objects. Grab it, click, hold down, drag it into your true branch. And here I'm going to be changing my operation to parse something. So I just type in P, and you can see the operation. This is JSON parse. Take JSON string text and parse it into an object, exactly what I want. And now I need to take my payload and put it here. So it should be the same JSON path here that you're going to be putting here. So you can either copy this value and paste it and or just change the JSON path, or use the connector snake by clicking the little dot next to the label, dragging it and dropping it on your trigger, and selecting the proper key. So I have my object helper that's going to convert that value from one to the other. I'm going to go and see if this is working properly. So what I'm going to do, come back to my Slack community /software request, press enter, wait for that to show up, type in Slack, put a link, put cost, put pilot Slack, submit it. Nothing should happen because we aren't responding yet. But if I come to my debug logs, my latest execution, you can see now it went down a branch. So it went down here, the property payload exists. Payload is here. My payload is passed into my object helper. Here's my source, but look, it's nicely configured now that I can actually use all this information. So my object helper, I'm going to rename it to parse, or maybe I'll do convert JSON to JSON to object. So that's what's happening here. So now that I have that object, I want to go look at it. Like, what do I have available to me? So if I look at my output, I have the user that submitted the information, their username, the type, my token, my trigger ID, my blocks. Okay, all this information. Well, here's my blocks. I know what my blocks are because I created them, but I can see that they generated a block ID. And I can see that it's plain text, but where's my value? Where did my user's value go? I see that the information's here. If I keep scrolling all the way down here, I can see my values are out, not kept with my blocks. So how do I reference the value to the block if they're kept separately? So you can see all the way down here, all my values. And the only way, and it doesn't show me what the text is, right? I just see the value. It doesn't say like, oh, well, service name is here, but I want to know that that is the referencing, like I'm referencing the right thing. So I want to combine all my block information with the value. I don't think that they should be separate. I want all this stuff to be held together. So what I can do is I can join this section down here, my values, with my blocks. And my blocks all have block IDs here, and my values, you can see, they're referenced by the block IDs. So what I can do is use a connector to help me create an object, take the blocks and make them look like my values, my state values. So my state values, once again, they're all keyed by their block ID, where all of my blocks are a list that don't have keys. Lists don't have keys, only objects. So I need to convert this into an object and key by the block ID. To achieve this, I'm going to use Lodash. Lodash is a JavaScript library that has a bunch of operations available to you. So we're going to use this instead of having to write JavaScript. It makes it very simple. I'm going to drag it under my object helper. My operation is going to be key by, and you can go to Lodash's website to see all the really awesome operations they have. Typically, it would look like this when you're writing in JavaScript with Lodash, but Trey takes care of that. All you have to do is put the name. The parameters, you're going to have two. The first one is going to be your block list. So I'm going to pull it up to my object helper. It doesn't have the proper output that I'm expecting. So I'm going to go refresh it by clicking on my object helper, use output, and I'm going to remap it. So I'm clicking into my Lodash, parameter 1. Now I have the proper output. I'm going to click on blocks. I want my blocks. And I want to key by, what do I want to key by? I'm pretty sure it was block ID. So I want that to be my key. So I'm going to convert a list into an object and have each key be this value so that it mirrors my state. Once again, coming down here, if I look at my state values, they're all object keyed by the block ID. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. This is going to be key by block ID. And instead of me having to go put in my slash command again, all I need to do is just replay this step. So I'll go to my debug logs, click refresh, let it replay. I'll wait for that execution to finish. And now I can click on to Lodash. And you can see it went from looking like this to looking like this, exactly what I need. So now that I have my keybind block list, I want to take my state values and combine them together. So I want to join them together on that value. So I'm going to go find my object helper, pull that under here, and I'm going to do a merge these two objects. So it's going to merge two objects as my operation. My source is going to be coming from my object helper, which is going to be my state values. All those different values, which is the key, which we saw, and I'm going to merge it with my new object that I just created. So my Lodash value. What this is going to be doing is merge values with blocks. They're going to become one. So once again, I don't have to go put a slash command in. I can replay it. Look at this execution, go look at my block, and now I can see I have my block. It's an input. Here's my block ID. Here's my label. Here's my element. Here's my value. It's all in one object, so I can reference this when I need to store it maybe to a file or to a database, or push it to maybe even creating a ticket in Jira. It's all ready to go. One last thing that I want to do is I want to know the email of the person that sent this request in without asking them. I do have the ID of that user. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look up for the Slack connector. We're going to use the connector, paste this here, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to authenticate. So I'm going to click New Authentication. This is production. I'm going to use the actual Tray app for this instead of my own app. So production, and then this is going to be Tray Labs. This is Amber's account. This is the same date, but this is not for my modal. I'm going to maybe say this is for Tray app. So maybe I'll put another identifier. Maybe I'll put Tray app. Personal, click next step. Permissions, I'm going to leave the same. I don't need to add anything. So I'm actually going through the OAuth flow for Tray's app versus my own. Create authentication, verify. I'm now authenticated. And the operation I'm going to do is get user. The user I'm going to be getting is going to come from my object up here. It's going to be the user's ID. So Slack, I authenticated. I added my operation, which is get user by ID. So this is going to be lookup requester. Going to go to my debug logs, going to refresh or replay. Click on that execution. I can see here, now I have all this information about the person. So including my email address. So whenever I create maybe my Jira ticket or my request to whoever this would go to, I have the person's email, I have the person's full name to send along with them. Awesome. Anybody have any questions? All right, so the very last step that we need to do is reply. We don't want to just take the request and not give any feedback to the user that it was actually successful. So I'm going to send back a message to the user. I'm going to send back a modal. So the thing with Slack is that you have 3 seconds to reply to a modal. So if we went through all this stuff, even though it's very fast, right, it's less than 3 seconds, I don't want to take any chances. If something gets hung up, maybe this Slack takes a little bit longer, I'm going to reply immediately and then get all my data. So what I can do, I don't need to reinvent it, like recreate another modal. I can just copy this modal by doing a right click, copy step, paste it in my true branch, and I can edit it here. So I'm going to display reply modal. I only have 3 characters left. If I need more description, I can put it in this description here. So this is my reply modal. And now all I need to do is change what my blocks are, because I don't need to have like, you know, a submit button. So I'm going to delete the submit button. And inside my blocks, I'm going to delete all my blocks. I don't need any of these blocks. What I'm going to put in here, I can come and configure, right? I don't need this. I don't need any inputs. I think I'm just going to put a thank you message, which really I could just put it inside, whoops, deleted one too many things. So I could just put it as like a thank you, but I think what I'll do is I'll do an image. So I'm going to delete this. So I have a title and an image. And my image, I think I'll make it like a thank you image. So all I need to do here is copy my blocks. And I'll change what my image URL is. I found an image that's free online. I went to Unsplash and I just typed in thank you. So I'm gonna find a thank you I like. I like this one. I can right click and I can open image, new tab, grab this URL, change my value here, my image URL, and now it shows thank you. My modal title is maybe request submitted. And I think I will change my alt text to thank you. And there's a title here. I don't want to just say I need a mark. I'm going to have this just say thank you as well. So once again, this is a nice little visualizer so you can see what your blocks look like. So I can come in here, grab my block, copy just my block, come back to tray, paste my block. This is going to say software requisition. I'm going to say, I can say software requisition submitted. So that's all I need to change there. Oh, this one too. It's no longer coming from the trigger. So that's actually going to come from our object helper. So I'm going to bring my object helper out above my HTTP connector, because remember, when it comes from the trigger, it's stringified. I don't have access to it. So we parse it into JSON and then I have access to it. So I can come in here, click on my object helper. I can refresh from my use output to look for my trigger ID. So I can look in here to see what that's going to be. There it is. Copy path, right click, copy path, come back to this modal and just update this. So the path, if you don't want to go through those steps, you can do step.object-helpers1.result.trigger-ID. So everything here, I don't have a submit button. I just have a block for an image, updated my title, and then I'm going to save. Moment of truth. I'm going to go give it a try. Put in Slack. I'm going to add a Slack link. Do this one. Paste it. I like Slack. Oh, it needs to be submit. I'm not seeing my modal show up. Let's go see why. Display modal. Oh, there we go. Error. Field match schema. So it looks like I messed something up. Field allows. Let's see. We have blocks, image, text. That looks right to me. Title. Let's see. This looks right. Ah, I forgot this one. No, I don't need that one. I just need the blocks inside there, which is weird. That looks right. There we go. Blocks. View, modal, title. Let's see what this is saying. Must be less than 25. Oh, I think it's my, maybe my title is too large. Something's too long. Let's see. Title text. Yeah, my title has too many characters. I didn't know there was a limit on characters. Okay, so I'm going to say, just say request submitted. Request submitted. Save it. Retry. Enter. Slack. I'm not going to go find my link right now. Free. This. I like Slack. Ooh, awesome. There's my submit. There's my thank you. And I can close my window. That's all. I hope everybody was able to get that corrected. Please feel free to reach out if you weren't able to get that completed. More than happy to help you, guide you along. You can reach out at amber@tray.io. You can also ping the teacher helpers in the channel here as well. You can reach out in the Slack community. We're all here to help each other. So thank you guys so much for joining.